hit the go live button. That generally means we're live. Welcome, welcome. As we wait for this show trial to begin, figure I'd just read this article. Colonel Schlichter. Them, you must care. Us, no. We refuse to care about stupid Democrat obsessions. We don't care about climate change. The hoax designed to fill the hole in Lib's soul that used to be filled with faith. And for the ruling caste, it's a tool to steal our money and freedom. We don't care about some alleged moral necessity to disarm normal Americans. When they whine, the purpose of guns is to hurt people. We nod. Yes, they are. Our guns never have and never will hurt anyone who is not a criminal or an aspiring tyrant. When those categories of bad people get uppity, yeah, we reserve our right to hurt them within the bounds of proper laws and morality. We don't care about claims that America was stolen from other people. Like every other patch of inhabited dirt on this planet, America was conquered from people who conquered it from someone else first. When we make a land acknowledgement, it goes as follows. Yeah, we took it, now it's ours. Somehow I don't think that would go over too well. Down here. Yes, legal herding. Well, that's what prison is. We trick ourselves into thinking it's designed for rehabilitation, but no rehabilitation takes place. It's about punishment. We don't care about their froth-mouthed accusations that America is some sort of racist cauldron of hatred. Many of us served in real racist cauldrons of hatred and have no time for the silly posturing of frivolous ninnies pretending to be white saviours by nattering on about the non-existent white supremacy, which is a remarkably colourblind concept, since anyone who rejects the ideology of the faculty lounge can practice it regardless of race or ethnicity, including people who are black and Latinx. Oh my God. Hey, it's our word now, commies, and we're never letting you live it down. And we don't care about a minor tussle punctuated by an unpunished government murder of an unarmed trespasser from over a year and a half ago, except to the extent that the political persecutions that followed must be remedied and avenged. Every non-narc victim of this Stasi witch hunt should be pardoned, and the next GOP administration should settle their civil rights suits for the outrageous violations inflicted upon them by a politicised DOJ for huge sums. The guy who shot Ashley Babbitt should be prosecuted. There's no statute of limitations on murder, and the GOP, once it takes back Congress in November, should investigate the federal agents on the scene. The systemic denial of rights and the selective prosecution that followed. That would make for an interesting set of primetime hearings, as opposed to the tedious political oniism of the current kangaroo committee. We don't care about any of it. And that is important. The left can only impose its will when it convinces us to choose to let them do so. They have to make us care. Look at them. They're a gaggle of mutated misfits, neurotic chicks, academic parasites, grievance hustlers, and femi doofuses who can't do a push-up. They can force nothing on us. That's why they attempt to enlist the power of the state to do it for them. But the real power comes from us going along. When you watch some stupid Star Wars spin-off on Disney, you empower them. When you refuse to vote because you are convinced your vote will never be counted, despite huge election reforms in place like Georgia, you help them. When you let yourself think, gosh, maybe this androgynous fatty screaming that I'm a privileged tool of the patriarchy has a point because she, he, it would never lie to my face, you let them win. No. Instead, fight for what you care about. We care that America neither be humiliated by 7th century savages, nor abandon our allies to them. We're going to reform our military into what it was meant to be, an awesomely unwoke killing machine that strikes terror into the hearts of communists and other terrorists around the globe. We care that American warriors are no longer sacrificed in stupid wars by people who will never pick up a weapon except to shoot their hunting buddies in the face by accident. We're going to oust the Beltway cowgirl and her ilk, but not Adam Kinzinger. His new Democrat friends already ousted him through gerrymandering, and it must sure be humiliating to have been so publicly treated like a cell block punk. Now we're electing based Republicans who know what time it is. It's time to fight. We care that our schools are hardened to protect themselves from the little psychos this sick culture breeds. And we care that they not teach woke nonsense. We're going to clean them up one school board insurrection at a time. And if the FBI thinks that makes us terrorists, then that's just another reason to close it down. We care about the culture enough to make it clear to woke companies that if they side with our enemies, they are our enemies. And there is a price for choosing to be our enemies. Oh, good God, it keeps going. We care about taking $140 to fill up tanks of our SUVs when oil is sitting there untouched under the surface of our great land because to get it would offend Gaia and all her followers in Manhattan and Santa Monica. We're going to elect a new president from the Drill Baby Drill Caucus. We care about our kids not becoming the psychosexual playthings of skeevy perverts, whether hired by some idiot principal or elsewhere in the culture. We're going to punch back so hard on these mutants that they'll understand that the kinder are off limits or else. We care about America. We're well aware that this is the greatest country on earth, the greatest country in human history. And we are not about to give it up to mollify a bunch of tantrum-throwing weenies trying to draw us into the psychodrama created by their daddy issues. And we care enough about America to tell these freaks demanding that we care about their Tubin Zoom call litany of gripes, no. Very good. Quite the fan of Colonel Schlichter. And now we only have 2 minutes left. That worked out well. I can't imagine the ratings for today will be better than Thursday. Purely because it's not prime time. Who the fuck's at home watching TV at 10 o'clock on a fucking Monday? I know one of the last minute additions to the witness list was, strangely enough, Liz Cheney's chief rival, her campaign manager, who unfortunately is had a family emergency and can't attend. Just too bad. My stream screwed up. Or is it just YouTube Studio? No, it's working. God damn, man. YouTube Studio is fucking terrible. They have a little preview window that shows you what you're streaming. And of course, it's delayed. But it just starts spinning. And you're never sure if your stream's not working anymore. It's fantastic. Thanks, YouTube. How is C-SPAN late? I thought these guys were always on time. come on C-SPAN, I'm eager to hear about how a whole bunch of unarmed people were planning to commit a coup. I mean, I know when I prepare for a coup, I bring armed people, you know, with guns. And I target the actual government, not the legislature. Jesus. Have some punctuality, C-SPAN.
War scene.
They're just
something
replaying.
like I'd seen out of the movies. I couldn't believe my eyes. There were officers on the ground, you know, they were bleeding, they were throwing up, they were, you know, they had, I mean, I saw friends with blood all over their faces.
I said, hold up, wait a minute, something ain't right.
I was catching people as they fell. It was carnage. It was chaos. I can't even describe.
God, I wish Bill Hicks was still alive.
Never in
He would be making a meal out of this.
did I think that as a police officer, as a law enforcement officer, I would find myself in the middle of a battle.
Officer Edwards testifying on Thursday night. Rhonda, that testimony is all the more poignant because behind her are other officers.
What the hell is that?
Of Officer Brian Sicknick, who died after the attack, an officer that was injured in that attack.
Notice how they say he died after the attack and he was injured in the attack? These two things are not connected.
Listen to her explain and describe what happened.
He was not hit by a fire extinguisher despite some people's protestations.
Officers who still work here and were here that day. This is so real to them.
And he died of a fucking stroke.
This is a priority right now, this congressional investigation.
Maybe the stress from the day killed him, but
told me last week that, you know, they put their body on the line and now it's time for Congress to do their job. I can tell you from being in the room that day while she was saying that, Officer Edwards was saying that, it was such a sobering to hear her say that.
Doesn't exactly look like a full house.
Congressional hearings covered the both impeachments of President Trump, and that tone that was in that room last Thursday was unlike what I felt before. And it dawned on me that there were so many people in the room, whether it was, you know, reporters like me or the members of Congress, of course, as well as officers who were either behind Officer Edwards there in solidarity with her, or the ones guarding the door and trying to ensure our safety in these proceedings.
Guarding the door? Really?
That day.
Doesn't sound like something that happened.
When you heard about her experiences there, and you also saw those never before seen images on video, it was breathtaking. It almost transported you right back to January 6th, and everyone in that room was a captive audience.
Rhonda Colvin, who was reporting live from the Capitol that day when the attack happened. James Hohmann, we've got more news to share about Bill Stepien and why he's not testifying today. Sources are telling the Washington Post that his wife has gone into labor, which is why he cannot be before this committee. Talk to us about
suffering your jocks, Liz.
Testimony, what his absence today means and what we may see in its place.
That's right, Libby. We have two sources confirming that Stepien's wife went into labor. And we are told that Kevin Marino, his lawyer, will read a statement. We do not know what Marino will say. We do not know how forthcoming it will be or how damning it will be for Donald Trump. but that would suggest
Seriously,
having the lawyer
C-SPAN.
read a statement that they are not going to reschedule him for one of the other hearings, but that they're going to establish the facts that they wanted to get out of Stepien.
I doubt it.
Fact that his lawyer is going to read a statement, that there is a level of cooperativeness at play here.
Cooperativeness.
And a desire by Stepien
I
to
believe the word you're looking for is cooperation.
support what the committee's doing, even as he also continues to work for, as I mentioned earlier,
Washington Post, ladies and
Harriet
gentlemen.
Hageman, the Republican who is challenging Liz Cheney in the primary in Wyoming with Trump's endorsement.
James, let's talk about the other witnesses testifying today.
Yeah, so we heard from Hannah Jewell about Chris Direwalt. He's a journalist. Was the political editor at Fox, but he's a well-respected, well-liked, serious political journalist who I've worked with and run into on the campaign trail many times over the years. In the afternoon,
So he's a member of the establishment.
Ginsburg
Good.
is a Republican's Republican. He is the ultimate Republican lawyer in town. He was the consigliere for Mitt Romney during the 2012 campaign, which I covered full time. And Ginsburg was a relentless advocate for Romney, was involved in a lot of the controversial Republican efforts for voter ID and that kind of thing. He's no squish, but he has been deeply critical of Trump. He's worked for all the Republican committees, the RNC, the NRSC, the NRCC, and he's written for our newspaper a series of op-eds criticizing Trump for sort of mistreating the judicial system. And so
I'm
his
shocked.
voice is,
Fucking shocked.
is very well respected in Washington, not sort of known outside of D.C. B.J. Pak, a Korean-American, first Korean-American U.S. attorney in the Northern District of Georgia, which is the area for Atlanta, is also testifying. He gave a deposition last summer to the Senate Judiciary Committee, and the Judiciary Committee released the transcript of that deposition. So we actually sort of have a sense of what Pak is going to say, and that's essentially that Trump pressured him really hard to try to find fraud, to substantiate some bogus conspiracy theories that Rudy Giuliani was peddling about ballot stuffing in Atlanta. That
Of course, if someone's telling you this shit is going to happen, like if I'm the president, someone tells me, hey, this election was stolen, we have evidence of X, Y, and Z, I'm going to fucking pick up the phone and talk to the US attorney and say, hey, I've been told this shit.
Resign.
Why are people telling me this shit? You go find that evidence.
With someone
They're not lying to me, are they?
Which is what Justice Department protocol would call for. Trump instead installed a U.S. attorney who was considered more of a loyalist from the coastal area of Georgia to oversee this fraud investigation in Atlanta. But that U.S. attorney, too, couldn't substantiate anything. Ultimately, putting the guys at the Justice Department, Jeff Rosen, the acting attorney general, Rich Donahue, who is his deputy, as acting deputy attorney general, in this hard position where they were telling Trump the U.S. attorneys can't substantiate any of this, and Trump was saying, well, keep trying, keep looking. So Pak is going to talk about it from his perspective. This is someone who hasn't really spoken publicly. Again, we saw the transcript of the deposition, but he hasn't given TV interviews. He hasn't written a book or anything like that. And it gets front and center to what happened in Georgia, which is where there is an ongoing criminal grand jury that's been convened.
How much do you pay these guys? Like,
to investigate
congressmen?
campaign to,
How much do they make? They can't be on fucking time?
didn't exist to allow him to
Jesus.
victory in Georgia. Georgia really was ground zero in other ways too. We'll hear later this week about one of the Jeff Clark, who was a Trump loyalist in the Justice Department, trying to get the Georgia legislature to declare that the electors were invalid. Lots of hanky-panky down south. This is sort of the opening salvo in that, and B.J. Pak is well positioned to really unpack a lot of those.
174,000 US per year.
I think it's the only one we haven't talked about so far. Important for Pennsylvanians who are watching today.
Yeah, your home state, and Mary Beth interviewed Al Schmidt during that period when the count was happening in Philadelphia.
Glad they're not my tax dollars.
We're there in Philadelphia as well. As there was mayhem in the streets, and this was the era when Rudy Giuliani was having his press conference at the Four Seasons Landscaping uh, shop instead of the Four Seasons Hotel. Basically, Al Schmidt, a Republican, said there was no there. There was no fraud in Philadelphia. But the Trump campaign, even though they'd been told this, even though Republican ballot watchers were saying there was nothing inappropriate happening, continued to repeat those lies that there was something untoward. And so this gets into state of mind, which is that there was both a lie, but then that they knew they were lying.
That's a perfect segue for our next
State of
guest,
mind. They're
investigative
talking
reporter
like it's a
Rosalynn
fucking trial.
Calderman. She's been following the committee's work as well as some of the threads that lead back to this. Roz, why is state of mind important? Why is there this question about what people like Donald Trump in particular and people around him knew about the veracity and reality of the election?
Yeah, the committee is trying clearly to lay out an argument that this was all done knowingly and corruptly, that Donald Trump was told repeatedly that he had lost the election, that he knew it, that every responsible person who was assigned...
He still doesn't admit it. So to say he knew it,
they didn't see any.
that's just like your opinion, man.
As a moral matter, that Donald Trump had every reason to know what he was doing, that he was subverting democracy despite having been told the reality of the situation on the ground. It's also important as a legal matter. We know, of course, that the Congressional Committee has no ability to charge people.
Yeah, exactly.
But it has become clear...
Not just for 2020. But 2012, 2014, 2016, 2018, and 2020.
To contemplate whether
they've been doing it in Philadelphia
in this time period
for almost a decade.
To try to argue that Donald Trump subverted democracy in an illegal way, it would probably be necessary for the Justice Department to show that he did so knowingly. And so each of these individual data points, these moments...
Subverting democracy. At what point did that become a...
lost the election, but he kept pushing...
So are we dragging... When's the hearings into Hillary and her Donald Trump stole the election?
Helps reflect on his potential state of mind.
But the Russians stole the election.
Because...
Like, Jesus Christ, this would be...
We know that he immediately responded.
This is farce.
All the many people who told him that he had lost the election by
And the fact that they still bang on about, oh, it's bipartisan.
So how you get around this this question of that Donald Trump himself didn't believe
it's not in the least bit bipartisan.
is complicated.
Right, because there's the question of, like, did he ever say to someone, yeah, I know I lost, but, right? So getting in state of mind is hard to prove.
Absolutely, and we
see what they should do is, if they take back the Senate, they should start a bipartisan Senate committee, and just invite just invite Manchin, and then if he accepts, oh sweet, there you go, it's bipartisan.
He had told Trump that he had lost the election, and Miller came out afterwards to say that they didn't play the next part of the clip, and the next part of the clip is him explaining that Trump didn't believe him. And so, you know, you're exactly right. There is this big question. Can they draw out testimony from any person who says not only that Trump was told that he lost the election, but that he understood it, he processed that information, and he believed...
I mean, let's be clear. The only reason this is...
Ross, one thing the committee has been trying
this is happening is because the Democrats are in trouble.
And whether Trump tried to raise money off of this false claim that the election was stolen.
Yeah, this is something I'm quite interested in seeing what they've got. It's an area where there's been a lot of reporting, but a place where the power of
this is ridiculous. You cannot prove intent.
Really powerful.
Trump's still going out there saying he was robbed.
Some information ahead of this morning.
He still says in context
about the ways
that
in which people
if he runs again and wins, he's won a third time.
Nevertheless, use that.
So how are you going to prove he doesn't believe it? The man fucking believes it.
You know, feels like
not necessarily true,
feels
but he believes it.
Shady, if not outright fraudulent, to do that, to raise money off of something.
Fucking hell, C-SPAN, please start. I don't want to listen to this woman anymore.
This is another area.
Be someone else. PBS. Start delayed by committee. Oh, for God's sakes. Ugh. Yeah, allegedly. What the hell is W? Let's watch the Young Turks. Dude, even the Young Turks are on time. Disgraceful. Let's watch this dropkick.
So ABC is reporting that Bill Stepien's wife went into labor.
God, this guy's a soy cuck.
I bet he's like, thank God. It's like, that baby saved me.
You couldn't put on a suit? Jesus.
Why are you gay?
Oh, they've delayed it half an hour, really? Oh, Jesus.
I am not gay. I have relationships with women, sex with men.
And I got news for you. That means you gay.
Means you're gay. Oh. Fucking hell. Jesus Christ, Jan 6 committee. Now I'm expected to vamp for another 20 minutes. We'll begin 20 to 30 minutes past. They can't even decide. What's the point of having a scheduled Congress if you're not going to fucking follow it?
Reporting on this. Rhonda Colvin, let's go to you. You know, we've just heard from Roz and James, the who's who of those testifying.
All these people who are probably on the like a lot of these people are on government payroll.
And you've been telling us about Zoe Lofgren and her role today, but if people are just tuning in, tell us about what we expect to see from her and why she is so significant in today's proceedings.
Well, Zoe Lofgren has also been a part of other investigations. You'll remember she was also an impeachment manager. And as I also said a little earlier, she heads the House Administration Committee, which handles overseeing the Capitol Police, handles overseeing some of the nuts and bolts of the infrastructure here in the Capitol complex. So she's coming with a lot of background information. From both her committee as
I have zero faith we're going to hear anything about doors that miraculously became unlocked,
that will be brought up. We are
stand-down orders,
continue to have
people on bullhorns directing people,
screen. We also know
Ray Epps.
Of course, we have witnesses who will be here in person, but we'll also continue
what
to
else?
see some clips from those tape
Timings.
positions. So she'll be leading the way.
An accurate timeline, you know, one that points out that when they began their storming
their membership and
of the Capitol, Trump was still halfway through his damn speech.
Signed and been working on specific aspects of this 7-part plan that Liz Cheney discussed last Thursday, that she said was the orchestration of the Trump White House in potentially overthrowing the results of the election. So you will see Zoe Lofgren. She is somewhat of a familiar face around the House. So you'll hear more from her, and we expect later this week. Adam Kinzinger says he will be leading one of the hearings as well, and so forth and so on through the next few days.
Thank you so much, Rhonda. You know, James, I remember
yes.
Congresswoman Lofgren speaking at Donald
It's far too late at night to be this wound up.
She had been involved in 3 prior impeachments. So this
I'm allowed to make sense because I'm on the other side of the world.
Investigative hearings, which are similar to what you might do in some of the committees that she's involved with, as Rhonda said, but they're really unique animals. I mean, this seems like it's more in line with a proceeding like that than anything else that Congress would normally do.
Totally, yeah, and that's exactly right. I mean, she's been on all the kind of the unpleasant, the hard committees that you know, really kind of a lawyer's lawyer needs to be on: rules and ethics, administration, judiciary. And so this is a unique for her skill set. She's sort of a no-nonsense person. She kind of tells it like it is. I mean, she's a
This is a problem. If you've got the spotlight,
Close ally of Nancy Pelosi.
you step into it. You don't
represent
fucking make everybody wait.
So this is a good fit for her skill set. She's not a show horse. She's very much a workhorse.
Rhonda Colvin, I know you'll be.
It's show pony, you fucking effete prick.
Tell us about some subtleties or things that we should be attentive to as this gets underway.
Show pony and workhorse.
Well, one thing I'll be listening out for is how quickly
Washington Post. Aren't these people all writers as well?
One of their star witnesses, William Stepien, today. We, of course, learned that just about an hour ago, so the committee has likely been discussing how they are going to restructure it. He was really a part of the meat of that first panel because the committee does want to get into the fact that Trump knew he had lost the election, but despite that, he went on into this campaign to tell the American people that the election was rigged. And of course, there's that other nugget, too, that Stepien...
Just to be clear, YouTube, I am not saying the election is rigged. This woman here is saying the election was rigged, and she's saying it in context.
So now that he is not a part of this, and we're only hearing a statement from his counsel, I'm interested to see how this committee has regrouped so quickly, because that is the focus of today's hearing. And of course, I'll be listening out to what the other witnesses have to detail. In that second panel, of course, you have people who are very familiar with the elections in Pennsylvania and Georgia, which, of course, were closely watched during the 2020 election.
I'm starting to think it is.
I'll be listening to all of it, and also
I'm starting to think it
get
is.
some hints as to what they're going to be doing for the rest of the week. We have sort of the vague...
You know what's funny? When I was a kid, I wanted to be a journalist.
As to who will be the next set of witnesses and what we might expect on Wednesday and Thursday of this week.
All right, thanks so much, Rhonda. We can see there some of the officers who were defending the Capitol.
Yes, you would think. You would think charisma would be an important trait, especially for on-camera personalities.
We were just talking about Bill Stepien a moment ago. He is not going to appear in person today. A reminder for anybody just tuning in that his wife has gone into labor, according to two sources talking to the
It also helps that Nick is entertaining.
Removed himself from the proceedings, but he will have a statement read on his behalf by his lawyer. And then there is the question of whether or not some prior interviews he's done with the committee could be used today. So we'll be listening for that as well. You know, one thing the committee's trying to do, James, is take us back to that day, right? They're digging into everything surrounding it and everything leading up to it, but they also want to take us...
No, we don't have... That guy has to be there to testify or film something. That was way too many tattoos. Dude, 10:45. Oh my God. Jesus. Oh yeah, absolutely. They're going to remind you every day until November. Remember when Trump almost cooed us? Coup. Full screen. Just going to leave it on that. I'll have to just vamp. Oh no, that's exactly what they're going to do. They literally have already done that. No one should be shocked. They did that on the first fucking day. Where I'm sure they've got at least 4 hours of Ivanka. Oh yes, that fucking guy. Yes, that's who it was. Yes, the tattered guy's that fucking crying cop. Ugh. But yeah, day one, they rolled out 30 seconds of Ivanka answering a question about Bill Barr. And that was it. And they quickly cut it off. And that was the entire fucking first day. Oh yeah, they're dragging this shit out. So we'll see all the footage, I'm sure. Something like 14,000 hours of footage that we'll never fucking see. Look at this mask. hell. Bro, you are in close proximity to all those people, and you're the only one wearing a mask. Take off the fucking mask. It's worthless. Just making life hard for himself. No lie, none of us should care about this. It will be interesting though to find out when all is said and done how much they spent investigating this. Hey, C-SPAN, how about you give us some audio, hey? With these fucking masks, man. Yep, that's the way. Touch it again. That'll help it work even better.
You personally like that.
How did I get personal? Bitch!
I do have to thank Ralph for making that clip. That's great. That's fantastic. Oh, did Georgia have their... running for re-election? Damn, really? Disappointing. Apparently the Georgia Secretary of State, Rafflesberger, beat Trump's candidate, or the candidate Trump had backed in the primary. Disappointing. Yeah, look, I said there's something to be said for the way it used to be. I think the world was a better place when you could raise a family, like, 3 kids, house, car, with just a blue-collar job. I think the world was a lot better then, a lot slower. I think a lot of the cause of our social ills is when we moved to an economy that was not just encouraging women into the workforce, but basically forcing them. And I mean, is it really a choice if you can... Like, it's not really a choice if you can't get by on one salary. the choice is taken away. Oh, that reminds me. Speaking of my body, my choice, I need to check SCOTUS blog. If the decision on Roe v. Wade drops today, it will be hard not to think the Supreme Court is trolling Congress.
Second January 6th Select Committee hearing to begin. Among the witnesses today, former Fox News political editor Chris Steyerwalt. Today's hearing was supposed to start about 30 minutes ago, but one of the witnesses had to cancel due to a family emergency. That was former Trump campaign manager William Stepien. Now expecting the hearing to start in about 15 minutes, 10:45 a.m. Eastern Time. If you do step away from your TV today, you can continue watching the January 6th committee hearing on the go with the C-SPAN Now app. It's our free mobile video app.
Let's see, Garland v. Gonzalez.
The January 6th committee hearings and all of our C-SPAN programming is brought to you as a public service by these television companies, including Dish Network, Comcast, and Charter.
And viewers like you. Lol, that would be funny. SCOTUS blog is saying at least 5 opinions today will be released. Oof. Already 4 degrees here. Going to be a very cold night. Hopefully them starting late means they don't run as long. Oy vey. Oh no, not a crypto crash. God damn it. I just bought the dip, but it keeps dipping. Yeah. 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 Not a good day. What the fuck? Liz Cheney, get the fuck out. Who to follow? Jesus. Oh, now I have to look, don't I? Oh my god. Um. Oof.
I am never going to financially recover from this.
Yay, I got to use that in context. Oh my god. Jesus. Well, obviously now's the time to buy. Lol. Don't look at the altcoins. Yeah. Yeah, don't look at the altcoins. The only coins I hold are some Ethereum and I hold some XRP. So thanks, Biden. Yeah, it hurts. I just need the SEC to drop their damn case. Oh, I wish people would stop retweeting Ian Miles Chong. Pelosi ramps up 1/6 operation against Gain, attacks First Amendment this morning. Leftists gather to break law and order. Like law in order. Oh, law in order to shut down Supreme Court just days after Justice Kavanaugh faced an assassination. Oh, I'm still up on some coins, down on some others. So it's a push at them. It's still a push even at the current prices. I've just held. The taxes here suck, so. So nice of these people to
Coverage this
respect our
morning
time.
from the Cannon House office building, waiting for the second day of the January 6th Select Committee to begin. It's the first of 3 hearings this week.
This guy doesn't look too happy to be here.
Going to be hearing from witnesses today, tomorrow, and Thursday. We'll be showing each day's hearing again in the evening on the C-SPAN networks.
Oh, wow.
The live coverage
Going
during
again.
the day.
Wow.
Today's testimony
Exciting.
from former Fox News political editor Chris Stirewalt. Due to a family emergency, former Trump campaign manager William Stepien will not be appearing as scheduled today. He was to testify under subpoena.
Wait, that can't be right.
Will be making a statement on his behalf.
That can't be a real
Hearings get
headline.
underway in about 5 minutes. If you do step away from your TV today, though, you can continue watching the January 6th committee hearing on the go with C-SPAN Now. It's our free mobile video.
To celebrate this recovery milestone.
The January 6th
What the?
committee hearings and all of C-SPAN's programming is brought to you as a...
What the hell is even that?
Including Dish Network, Comcast, and Charter.
Holy shit. Oh. Oh, I'm shocked Ben Shapiro is not opposed to red flag laws. Oh, lol, I remember that. Planning a cookout this year? Catch up on the news. According to the Farm Bureau, the cost of a 4th of July barbecue is down from last year. It's a fact you must heed. Hot dog. The Biden economic plan is working, and that's something we can all relish. Yeah, the cost of a 4th of July cookout is down 16 cents. Something tells me you're not going to be seeing that tweet for this year. Holy shit. They don't even make... This doesn't even make sense. Our home is on fire. What? What does that even mean? If you're talking about your punani, then you should probably get that checked out. It's on fire. Your punani. Yeah, I'm reliably told this is an insurrection. Sorry, this has turned from me watching this to you guys just watching me scroll through Twitter. My Twitter is entertaining to you. Yes, agreed. Double-digit inflation is worse than January 6th.
And making sure someone acts like this. You start by secretly creating a problem in the world and making sure someone else is blamed for it in the public arena, in the public mind. It could be a run on a currency, it could be a government collapse, at its most extreme it could be a war, because the 2 world wars in this century were funded, all sides were funded by the same people. Provable. The same people that funded the Allies
He's going to say the Jews, isn't he?
and funded the Soviet Union also funded Hitler. Through loans from America, known as the Young Plan and the Dawes Plan, and also via the German subsidiaries of American multinational companies. Why would they do that? Why would someone want to fund all sides in a war? What is good is a war? Well, first of all, on one level, it makes vast amounts of money if you're lending money to all sides and you're also selling them lots of arms and all that stuff.
Rule of
the
acquisition,
fundamental
war
reason
is good for business?
is to change the nature of post-war society. And what we saw in the First World War and the Second World War were massive global examples of problem-reaction solution.
Yeah, my
we are looking
my
at a
superannuations took a bit of a hit this year.
before our eyes. We don't live in a democracy in this country or in America or in these other places. We live in a one-party state where the same force from the peak of the pyramid string pulls all sides. The creation of a one-world government to which nation-states would be principalities, administrative units, a world central bank which would administer all financial transactions on the planet.
Do I get freedom of movement?
Currency, which wouldn't be coins and notes, it would be merely electronic, cashless society, for which there are fundamental implications for freedom, as we'll see as we go along tonight. A world army under centralized control with nation-state armies.
You know, implications for freedom, like being told you are now excluded from the banking system. Lucky that's never happened to anybody.
Dismantled under the justification of seeking peace, and a microchipped population linked to a global computer, the latter of which sounds bizarre to many people on first hearing, except that we are ridiculously close to it and the technology already exists.
Ridiculously close to it in 1996.
So World Health Organization says there's going to be a measles epidemic next year. Get vaccinated. Get your children vaccinated. You're a bad parent if you don't. Then the same people that organize that then start flogging out the vaccine. So if we take one element of that under problem, reaction, solution, it's amazing the extent to which we have given our power away, our spiritual power. It's all about taking our power back. Because once we do that, it's all over.
Look, here's the thing.
Fine. Listen,
I'm going to be honest with you. I'm kind of retarded.
The Select Committee to investigate the January 6th
finally.
United States Capitol will be in order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare the committee in recess at any point.
Here we go.
Pursuant to House Deposition Authority Regulation 10,
Hey, C-SPAN, turn it
the
up.
chair announces the committee's approval to release the deposition material presented during today's hearing. Good morning. Last week, the Select Committee laid out a preview of our initial findings about the conspiracy overseen and directed by Donald Trump to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election and block the transfer of power, a scheme unprecedented in American history. My colleagues and I don't want to spend time talking about ourselves during these hearings, but as someone who's run for office a few times, I can tell you, at the end of a campaign, it all comes down to the numbers. The numbers tell you the winner and the loser. For the most part, the numbers don't lie.
I doubt it.
Add up with the numbers, you go to court to get resolution. And that's the end of the line. We accept those results. That's what it means to respect the rule of law. That's what it means to seek elective office in our democracy. Because those numbers aren't just numbers, they're votes. They're your votes. They are the will and the voice of the people. And the very least we should expect from any person seeking a position of public trust is the acceptance of the will of the people, win or lose. Donald Trump didn't. He didn't have the numbers, he went to court. He still didn't have the numbers, he lost. But he betrayed the trust of the American people. He ignored the will of the voters.
As has been said many times, not a single one of those cases were ruled on the merits. They were all dismissed on procedural grounds, mostly mootness. I think some were mootness, the rest were standing, which is bullshit.
And knew he lost an election, and as a result of his loss, decided to wage an attack on our democracy.
Oh my God.
An attack on the American people by trying to rob you of your voice in our democracy. And in doing so, lit the fuse that led to the horrific violence of January 6th, when a mob of his supporters stormed the Capitol sent by Donald Trump to stop the transfer of power. Today, my colleague from California, Ms. Lofgren, and our witnesses will detail the Select Committee's findings on these matters. But first, I will recognize our distinguished Vice Chair, Ms. Cheney of Wyoming, for any opening statement she'd care to offer.
Stop it. Get some help.
Last week, as the chairman noted, our committee began outlining a 7-part plan overseen by President Trump to overturn the 2020 election. Today, we will begin looking at the initial part of that plan. President Trump's effort to convince millions of Americans that the election was stolen from him by overwhelming fraud. A federal court has already reviewed elements of the committee's evidence on this point and said this, quote, "In the months following the election, numerous credible sources from the president's inner circle to agency leadership and statisticians informed President Trump and Dr. Eastman that there was no evidence of election fraud," close quote, sufficient to overturn the 2020 presidential election.
Nice caveat.
Opinion methodically documents each of the principal reasons for that conclusion, and I would urge all those watching to read it. Today, we will begin to show the American people some of our evidence. Today, you will hear much more from former Attorney General Bill Barr's recorded testimony, and you will hear in greater detail what others in the department told President Trump, that his claims of election fraud were nonsense. You will also hear much more from President Trump's own campaign experts, who had also concluded that his fraud claims could not be supported. Let me focus briefly on just 3 points now. First, you will hear firsthand testimony that the president's campaign advisors urged him to await the counting of votes and not to declare victory on election night. The president understood even before the election that many more Biden voters had voted by mail because President Trump ignored the advice of his campaign experts and told his supporters only to vote in person. Donald Trump knew before the election that the counting of those mail-in ballots in several states would not begin until late in the day and would not be complete for multiple days. This was expected, reported, and widely known. You will also hear testimony that President Trump rejected the advice of his campaign experts on election night and instead followed the course recommended by an apparently inebriated Rudy Giuliani to just claim he won and insist that the vote counting stop, to falsely claim everything was fraudulent. He falsely told the American people that the election was not legitimate. In his words, quote, "a major fraud." Millions of Americans believed him. Second, pay attention to what Donald Trump and his legal team said repeatedly about Dominion voting machines. Far-flung conspiracies with a deceased Venezuelan communist.
This was the biggest mistake Trump could have done.
Complete nonsense.
Signing on to that Dominion voting ridiculousness.
President Trump's own campaign advisors,
Listening to Rudy Giuliani, not hiring actual decent lawyers.
all told him the same thing. Here, for example, is White House lawyer Eric Hirschman. His view was shared by many of the Trump team whom we interviewed.
I thought the Dominion stuff was, I never saw any evidence whatsoever to sustain those allegations.
Oh, geez,
And third,
one clip.
as Mike Pence's staff started to get a sense for what Donald Trump had planned for January 6th, they called the campaign experts to give them a briefing on election fraud and all the other election claims. On January 2nd, the general counsel of the Trump campaign, Matthew Morgan, this is the campaign's chief lawyer, summarized what the campaign had concluded weeks earlier, that none of the arguments about fraud or anything else could actually change the outcome of the election.
Generally discussed on that topic was whether the fraud, maladministration,
Drinking Diet Coke? What the fuck? What the fuck is wrong with you, man?
if aggregated and read most favorably to the campaign, would that be outcome determinative? And I think everyone's assessment in the room, at least amongst the staff, Mark Short, myself, and Greg Jacob, was that it was not sufficient to be outcome determinative.
As is obvious, this was before the attack on the Capitol. The Trump campaign legal team knew there was no legitimate argument.
Her losing her primary is going to be so funny.
To overturn the election. And yet President Trump went ahead with his plans for January 6th anyway. Mr. Chairman, hundreds of our countrymen have faced criminal charges. Many are serving criminal sentences because they believed what Donald Trump said about the election, and they acted on it. They came to Washington, D.C. at his request They marched on the Capitol at his request, and hundreds of them besieged and invaded the building at the heart of our constitutional republic. As one conservative editorial board put it recently, quote, "Mr. Trump betrayed his supporters by conning them on January 6th, and he is still doing it." Another conservative editorial board that has long supported President Trump said last week, Donald Trump, quote, "won't stop insisting that 2020 was stolen, even though he has offered no proof that that is true."
What does that tell you, love? It tells you he believes it.
Now, quote, "clings to more fantastical theories, such as Dinesh D'Souza's debunked 2,000 mules, even as recounts
It's not debunked because we haven't seen the data.
Wisconsin confirm Trump lost. Those are the correct conclusions to draw from the evidence gathered by this committee. We have much more evidence to show the American people on this point than we can reasonably show in one hearing. But today, we will...
That's why we have to have 15.
Chairman, I yield back.
Without objection, the chair recommends...
What the hell was that?
...for an opening statement.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. In our opening hearing, we gave an overview of our investigation into the January 6th attack. The plot to overthrow the election was complex and had many parts, which we'll explore in remaining hearings. But today, we examine the false narrative that the 2020 election was, quote, stolen. Former President Trump's plan to overturn the election relied
Meanwhile,
on a sustained effort to deceive millions of Americans
womp womp.
with knowingly false claims of election fraud.
While they're obsessed with this,
The plot
the Dow is down 800
convincing his
points.
supporters about these false claims. Today, we'll
The
demonstrate
Nasdaq another 400.
was not stolen. The American people elected President Joe Biden. We'll present evidence that Mr. Trump's claims of election fraud were false, that he and his closest advisors knew those claims were false, but they continued.
You can't prove he knew. All you can prove is he was told.
Attacked the Capitol. We'll also show that the Trump campaign used these false claims of election fraud to raise hundreds of millions of dollars from supporters who were told their donations were for the legal fight in the courts. But the Trump campaign didn't use the money for that.
No, because every time they got to a court, the court fucking threw it out.
Former president laid the
Over
groundwork
bullshit reasons.
well in
God.
advance of the election. As early as April 2020, Mr. Trump claimed that the only way he could lose an election would be as a result of fraud.
You know,
Yeah, because at the time it was actually
and all of the things that are happening
probably
with
gonna win.
Votes by mail, where thousands of votes are gathered, and I'm not going to say which party does it, but thousands of votes are gathered and they come in and they're dumped in a location, and then all of a sudden you lose elections that you think...
It's almost like he knew it was going to happen.
As if the election is rigged. Remember that. It's the only way we're going to lose this election.
This is going to be a fraud like you've never seen. Did you see what's going on? Take a look at West Virginia, mailmen selling the ballots. They're being sold. They're being dumped in rivers. This is a horrible thing for our country. This is not going to end well.
Mr. Trump decided even before the election that regardless of the facts and the truth, if he lost the election, he would claim it was rigged. Mr. Trump was right about one thing. It did not end well. On election night, Mr. Trump claimed even before the votes were counted that his loss was a result of fraud. Now, Thursday, we had testimony from Attorney General Barr about the Department of
This
Justice
woman is 74 years old.
of Mr. Trump's fraud claims. Barr told Trump directly that his claims were BS. Yet, after hearing the truth and that warning from the AG, Mr. Trump continued to peddle the false claims of fraud. You'll hear detailed testimony from Attorney General Barr describing the various election fraud claims the Department of Justice investigated. He'll tell you how he told Mr. Trump repeatedly that there was no merit to those claims. Mr. Barr will tell us that Mr. Trump's election night claims of fraud were made without regard to the truth and before it was even possible to look for evidence of fraud. Attorney General Barr wasn't alone. You'll see and hear today other Department of Justice officials and senior advisors to Mr. Trump that they told him the claims he was making were not supported by evidence. The election fraud claims were false. Mr. Trump's closest advisors knew it. Mr. Trump knew it. That didn't stop him from pushing the false claims and urging his supporters to, quote, fight like hell, to, quote, take back their country. After he lost the election, various
You understand he's not being literal.
Testimony today from a renowned Republican election litigation lawyer who explained the normal process by which candidates challenge an election. Rather than accept the results of the election and the decisions of the courts, Mr. Trump pursued a different strategy. He tried to convince the American people the election had been stolen. Many of his supporters believed him, and many still believe him today. The attack on January 6th was a direct and predictable result of Mr. Trump's decision to use false claims of election fraud to overturn the election and to cling to power. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. I now welcome our first witness.
No ruling on
Joined today by former Fox News politics Chris
on Roe v. Wade. No
Bill
change.
Stepien, President
Wednesday,
Trump's
probably.
former campaign manager, was subpoenaed to be here and was in Washington this morning, prepared to testify. Kevin Marino, Mr. Stepien's attorney, is here with us today. Thank you, Mr. Marino, for coming. And he has advised us that Mr. Stepien's wife went into labor this morning. Mr. Stepien unexpectedly had to travel to be with his wife, and we wish him the best. Due to the depth and rigor of our investigation, we have several hours of Mr. Stepien's testimony from when we interviewed him in February, and we will be presenting that testimony today. I'll now swear in our witness. The witness will please stand and raise his right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God. Thank you. You may be seated. Let the record reflect the witness answered in the affirmative. I now recognize myself for questions. I want to start by showing a video that tells the story of what was going on in the Trump White House on election night in November of 2020.
Boring. You were on the night of the election, November the 3rd.
I was at the White House.
You know where specifically over the course of that night you spent your time within the White House?
There was an event that was organized in the residence, so I moved between the residence, a room sort of off the residence where some family members were.
I take it the president was upstairs in the residence.
He was upstairs. We were kind of on the first floor, so not upstairs. We were with mostly with Ivanka and her brothers and a couple other people who'd be coming in and out.
Can you just describe the atmosphere? What were people expecting that night when you got to the White House?
I think that there was, typically for people who show up there on election night, it's going to be a self-select, more positive environment.
God, this guy's a cuck.
A little bit nervous, not knowing what was going to happen with the red wave or the red mirage as the debate was being carried out.
Why are you gay?
Is calling Arizona for Joe Biden. That is a big get for the Biden campaign.
Arizona's called. Do you remember that?
I do.
What do you remember happening where you were when Arizona was called?
There was surprise at the call.
Who was surprised?
Most everyone in the room.
Were you being one of them?
Yes.
Did that shift the atmosphere or the attitude in the White House?
Completely.
How so? Can you describe that?
Because Fox News was the first one to go out and say that.
So was it anger kind of directed towards Fox News for making a call more so than like disappointment that maybe the campaign lost Arizona?
All the above.
So both anger and disappointment.
Both disappointed with Fox and concerned that maybe our data or our numbers weren't accurate.
Were you in the White House residence during the sort of past midnight into the early morning hours of November 4th?
Yes, oh sure. It went over beyond midnight, yes.
Do you remember Rudy Giuliani being at the White House on election night and into the early hours the next morning?
I do.
What do you remember about when he came?
He was I had heard that he was upstairs, in that aforementioned reception area, and he was looking to talk to the president, and it was suggested instead that he come talk to several of us down off the map room.
You said that you had heard that Mr. Giuliani wanted to talk to the president, and then he was directed your way. Did you end up talking to Mr. Giuliani when he was directed your way?
I did.
What was that conversation?
A lot of conversations were directed my way. A few of us, myself, Jason Miller, Justin Clark, and Mark Meadows, gathered in a room off the map room to listen to whatever Rudy presumably wanted.
I think once all this is said and done, they can put this on put this online, and people can be prescribed it for when they have sleeping disorders.
Like Mayor Giuliani.
Tell me more about that. What was your observation about his potential intoxication during that discussion about what the president should say when he's addressed the nation on election night?
And the mayor was definitely intoxicated, but I do not know his level of intoxication.
Objection, relevance.
With the president, for example.
Were you part of any discussions with the people I mentioned, Mr. Stepien, Mr. Meadows, or anyone else, about whether the president should make any sort of speech on election night?
I mean, I spoke to the president. They may have been present, but President spoke to the president several times that night.
There were suggestions by, I believe it was Mayor Giuliani, to go and declare victory and say that we'd won it outright.
It was far too early to be making any calls like that. Ballots were still being counted. Ballots were still going to be counted for days.
Ballots are still being printed.
And it was far too early to be making any proclamation like that.
Loaded into bags.
To the best of my memory, I was saying that we should not go and declare victory until we had a better sense of the numbers.
Okay, can you be more specific about that conversation, in particular what Mayor Giuliani said, your response, and then anybody else in the room's response?
I think effectively Mayor Giuliani was saying, we won it. They're stealing it from us. Where'd all the votes come from? We need to go say that we won. And essentially that anyone who didn't agree with that position was being weak.
What was your view at the time as to what he should or shouldn't say?
I don't know that I had a firm view as to what he should say in that circumstance. The results were still being counted. It was becoming clear that the race would not be called on election night.
My belief, my recommendation was to say that votes were still being counted. It's too early to tell, too early to call the race, but we proud of the race we ran. and we, think we're in good position, and we'll have more to say about this, the next day or the next day, whenever we had something to say.
And did anybody who was a part of that conversation disagree with your message?
Yes.
Who was that?
The president disagreed with that. I don't recall the particular words. He thought
Does anybody remember the part where they said they had a witness
and
to talk to?
that they were going to, go
Jesus, fuck.
he was going to go in a different direction.
This is a fraud on the American public. This is an embarrassment to our country. We were getting ready to win this election. Frankly, we did win this election. We did win this election.
Mr. Steiwalt, did President Trump have any basis to declare victory on November 4th, 2020? Thank you. Mr. Stepien also testified that President Trump had no basis for declaring victory at that point in time.
My belief, my recommendation was to say that votes were still being counted. It's too early to tell.
Counted,
to
printed.
call the race, but we proud of the race we ran, and we think we're in good position, and we'll have more to say about this the next day or the next day, whenever we had something to say.
Thank you. Mr. Steiwalt, after the votes were counted, who won the presidential election of 2020?
Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. of the great state of Delaware.
Thank you. That's the bottom line. We've had an election. Mr. Trump lost, but he refused to accept the results of the democratic process. Pursuant to Section 5C8 of House Resolution 503, I now recognize the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Lofgren, for questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Steiwalt, I'd like you to explain a term that was thrown around a lot during the election, and that's the so-called red mirage. What does that mean?
So, in the 40 or 50 years, let's say, that Americans have increasingly chosen to vote by mail or early or absentee, Democrats prefer that method of voting more than Republicans do.
I wonder why that might be.
Republicans win Election Day, and Democrats win the early vote. And then you wait and start counting, and it depends on which ones you count first, but usually it's Election Day votes that get counted first. And you see the Republicans shoot ahead, and then the process of bailing and binding and unbinding all those mail-in votes. And some states like Pennsylvania refuse to count the votes first, so you have to wait for all of that to come in. So in every election, and certainly a national election, you expect to see the Republican with a lead, but it's not really a lead. When you put together a jigsaw puzzle, it doesn't matter which piece you put in first. It ends up with the same image. So for us, who cares? But that's because no candidate had ever tried to avail themselves of this quirk in the election counting system. We had gone to pains, and I'm proud of the pains we went to make sure that we were informing viewers that this was going to happen, because the Trump campaign and the president had made it clear that they were going to try to exploit this anomaly. And we knew it was going to be bigger because the percentage of early votes was higher, right? We went from about 45% of the votes being early and absentee to, because of the pandemic, that increased by about 50%. So we knew it would be longer, we knew it would be more. So we wanted to keep telling viewers, hey, look, the number that you see here is sort of irrelevant because it's only a small percentage of these votes.
So this red mirage, that's really what you expected to happen on election night.
Happens every time.
Thank you, Mr. Steiwalt. Now, I'd like to play a clip of Attorney General Bill Barr, who also explains what was expected to happen on election night.
right out of the box on election night, the president claimed that there was major fraud underway. I mean, this happened, as far as I could tell, before there was actually any potential of looking at evidence. And it seemed to be based on the dynamic that at the end of the evening, a lot of Democratic votes came in, which changed the vote counts in certain states. And that seemed to be the basis for this broad claim that there was major fraud. And I didn't think much of that because people had been talking for weeks and everyone understood for weeks that that was going to be what happened on election night.
Mr. Stepien obviously could not be with us today, and it's proper for him to be with his wife as they welcome their child. But he also had discussions with the president about the Red Mirage, that is, that it would be a long night and that early votes would favor him, but that lots more votes would be counted over the course of the night and the days after. So let's play clip 1 from our interview.
This is why they had to delay for 45 minutes, because they had to rejig all this stuff.
I recounted back to that conversation with him, in which I said, just like I said in 2016 was going to be a long night. I told him in 2020 that it was going to be a process again, as the early returns are going to be positive, and we're going to be watching the returns of ballots as they rolled in thereafter.
So
is it fair to say you're trying to present what you thought would be a realistic picture of what might happen over the course of that night, being election night?
That night and the days that followed. Yeah, I always told the president the truth, and I think he expected that from me, and I told him it was going to be a process. It was going to be, we're going to have to wait and see how this turned out. So I just like I did in 2016, I did the same thing in 2020.
So let's watch a short clip of President Trump speaking after he received that information from his campaign advisors.
We want all voting to stop. We don't want them to find any ballots at 4 o'clock in the morning and add them to the list.
So when former President Trump said that, it contradicted what his advisors had warned would happen. We all know that mail-in ballots played an important role in the 2020 election.
Yeah, very important role.
President Trump continuously discouraged mail-in voting. Mr. Stepien was so concerned about the president's position on mail-in voting that in the summer of 2020, he met with President Trump along with House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy. Let's play clip 4.
Meeting that was had, in particular, I invited Kevin McCarthy to join the meeting, he being of like mind on the issue with me, in which we made our case for why we believed mail-in voting not to be a bad thing for his campaign. But the president's mind was made up, and he understands, how many times to, go to the well on a particular topic.
Yeah, I understand. Tell me a little bit more about the argument that you and Mr. McCarthy made to the president in that meeting as to why it wasn't a bad thing that mail-in voting was available.
Largely two pillars to that argument, both of which I've previously mentioned. One, leaving a good deal to chance, pushing or urging your voters to vote only on election day leaves a lot to chance. That's A. And B, also previously mentioned, the fact that the Trump campaign, Republican National Committee, the Republican Party, had an advantage of grassroots workers and volunteers on the ground that would allow, an advantage to enhance return rates of ballots that were mailed. Those were the two pillars of the argument.
I see. And what, if anything, do you recall Representative McCarthy?
What, if anything?
During that meeting?
We were echoing the same argument. I mean, his words echoed mine, and vice versa on those two topics.
Mr. Stirewalt, you were at the decision desk at Fox News on election night, and you called Arizona early for President Biden, which was controversial. How did you make that call, and where did you think the race stood in the early hours of the next day?
Well, it was really controversial to our competitors who we beat so badly by making the correct call first. Our decision desk was the best in the business, and I was very proud to be a part of it. Because we had partnered with the Associated Press and the National Opinion Research Center at the University of Chicago, thanks to my colleague and friend Arnon Mishkin, had built a wonderful device for forecasting the outcomes of elections. So we had a different set of data than our competitors did. We had more research, and we had a better system, and we had a great team. So what you're waiting to see is, do the actual votes match up with the expectations in the poll? The real votes are testing the quality of your poll in targeted precincts and in targeted places. And let me tell you, our poll in Arizona was beautiful, and it was doing just what we wanted it to do, and it was cooking up just right. And at some point, and I forget exactly who, but at some point it became clear
Interesting phrasing there.
Arizona was getting ready to make a call. So we, my boss, Bill Salmon, said we're not making any call until everybody says yes, because that was always our policy, unanimity. And you have to understand,
Unanimity.
in this room, you have, the best. People from academia, Democrats, Republicans, a broad cross-section of people who had worked together for a decade, who are really serious about this stuff. So we knew it would be a consequential call because it was one of 5 states that really mattered, right? Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona were the ones that we were watching. We knew it would be significant to call any one of those 5, but we already knew Trump's chances were very small and getting smaller based on what we had seen. So we were able to make the call early. We were able to beat the competition. We looked around the room, everybody says yay, and on we go. And by the time we found out how much everybody was freaking out and losing their minds over this call, we were already trying to call the next state. We had already moved on. We were to Georgia, we were to North Carolina, we were looking at these other states. So we thought we were pleased, but not surprised.
I see. After the election, as of November 7th, in your judgment, what were the chances of President Trump winning the election?
After that point?
Yes.
None. I mean, I guess it's always possible that you could have, a truckload of ballots be found somewhere, I suppose. But once you get into this space, ahead of today, I thought about what are the largest margins that could ever be overturned by a recount, and the kind of stuff that we heard Mike Pence talking about, sounding like a normal Republican that night when he said, we'll keep every challenge. Nothing like that. In a recount, you're talking about hundreds of votes. When we think about calling a race, one of the things that we would think about is it outside the margin of a recount? And when we think about that margin, we think about, in modern history, you're talking about 1,000 votes, 1,500 votes at the way, way outside. Normally, you're talking about hundreds of votes, maybe 300 votes that are going to change. So the idea that through any normal process in any of these states, remember, he had
the idea that this was a precedented election, like this level of mail-in balloting was unprecedented in 2020.
You're better off to play the Powerball than to have that come in.
On November 7th, the other major news outlets called the race for President Biden. Now, Mr. Stepien told the committee that he thought the odds were, and this is a quote, very, very, very bleak, and held a meeting with the president that same day. Let's show clip 8, video clip 8.
I mean, with each day that wore on, the trajectory of the race, on election night, Trump ahead in many states, and as that week wore on, as the third became the fourth, became the fifth, and so on and so forth, the vote by mail ballots were tabulated, you know, Trump's lead, you know, grew more narrow, and in some places Biden surpassed, you know, Trump in the vote totals. So as the week wore on, as we paid attention to those numbers multiple times a day, you know, internally, you know, I was feeling less confident for sure.
What was your view on the state of the election at that point?
You know, very, very, very bleak. You know, we told him, the group that went over there outlined, you know, my belief in chances for success at this point, and then we pegged it at you know 5, maybe 10% based on recounts that you know either were automatically initiated or could be initiated based on you know realistic legal challenges, not all the legal challenges that eventually were pursued. But you know it was you know my belief is that it was a very, very, I mean 5 to 10% is not a very good optimistic outlook.
Now, as President Trump and others continued to claim that the election was stolen, there were lawyers who were a part of the campaign lawyers, who were responsible for investigating the fraud claims. That includes Alex Cannon, who could not validate the claims that were being made, including those being made by the president. Let's roll video 13.
This is an email. It's 2 emails, actually. The first is from Alex Cannon to you and Faith McPherson. And then you forward that email on to Mark Meadows, Justin Clark, and Jason Miller, the subject being AZ Federal ID voters. If you look at the original email there, it says, Bill, we completed the AZ analysis you requested. I assume that's about Arizona. And because of the
margin was 10,457 votes
this is
in
a
Arizona.
highly unreliable way to identify ineligible voters. Can you explain the task that you gave to Ms. Cannon for this Arizona analysis?
Sure. Previously, I described some of my frustration with some of the claims that people would throw at President Trump regarding, you need to look at this, this happened in this state or that happened in that state. And it would be, those would flow to us to look into. I talked about that before, I think.
Yep.
This is an example of that. I recall in Arizona, someone had thrown out, I believe this to be the claim, that there were thousands of illegal citizens, people not eligible to vote.
Illegal citizens?
In Arizona. Someone had thrown out that claim to President Trump. And with, the margins being as close as they were, as I previously described,
There's a lot of sunbirds in Arizona.
Potentially matter.
Potentially a lot of people voted in 2 states.
Wild claim is thrown out, which, on its face didn't seem, realistic or possible to me. I asked Alex to look at the claim, and I haven't read this full email, but I recall the response to that. The reality of that was not illegal citizens voting in the election. I think it was like overseas voters voting in the election. So obviously, people who were eligible to vote.
When these findings were passed up the chain to President Trump, he became frustrated and he replaced the campaign's legal team. Let's play clip 14.
Huge mistake.
The president, it was during the second week where things like you displayed were occurring, where he was growing increasingly unhappy with his team, me less so because I was less involved at this point, but still me growing increasingly unhappy with Justin Clark, And that kind of, paved the way for, Justin to be moved out and Mayor Giuliani to be moved in as the person in charge of, the legal side of the campaign and for all intents and purposes, the campaign at that point.
Now, when Mr. Stepien became campaign manager, he was the second Trump campaign manager for the 2020 race, and there were only about 115 days until Election Day. So let's play the video.
I inherited a campaign that was, the day I was hired was, I believe, President Trump's low point in the 2020 daily average polling against President Biden. It was a campaign at a low point in the polls. It was structurally and fiscally deficient. There was a great deal wrong with the campaign in both of those areas. So most of my day spent fixing and I think I took over with 115 days left in the campaign. Most of my time spent fixing the things that could be fixed with 115 days left in the campaign.
Now, Mr. Stepien has been in the campaign field for a long time, and he worked for lots of different candidates and campaigns. He testified to this committee about his concerns given the claims that Mr. Giuliani and Ms. Powell and their team were making publicly. Let's play clip 15.
Okay, and was it important for you, Mr. Stepien, to sort of pull back just for your own professional reputation? You didn't want to be associated with some of what you were hearing from the Giuliani team and others that sort of stepped in the wake of your departure?
I didn't mind being categorized. There were two groups of, we called them kind of my team and Rudy's team. I didn't mind being characterized as being part of Team Normal, as reporters, kind of started to do around that point in time. I said, hours ago, early on that, I've been doing this for a long time, 25 years, and I've spanned, political ideologies from Trump to McCain to Bush to Christie, and, I can work under a lot of circumstances for a lot of varied, candidates and politicians, but a situation where, and I think along the way I've built up a pretty good, I hope, a good reputation for being honest and professional, and I didn't think what was happening was necessarily honest or professional at that point in time. So that led to me stepping away.
So the president did get rid of Team Normal, and I'd like to play a clip showing that the president found the people he needed to perpetuate his claims of fraud.
They saw a big truck bringing in 100,000 ballots in garbage cans, in waste paper baskets.
God, why would you give this guy any
shopping baskets? And every single one of them
any command over anything?
Because they were being notified by Smartmatic in Frankfurt that Biden was way behind and they better come up with a lot more ballots. And we can prove every single thing I just said. If you gave me the paper ballots, I could probably turn around each one of these states. I'm absolutely convinced if you let me examine each one of those ballots, I'd pull out enough that were fraudulent that it would shake the hell out of the country.
It can set and run an algorithm that probably ran all over the country to take a certain percentage of votes from President Trump and flip them to President Biden, which we might never have uncovered.
Release the Kraken. Fucking hell.
Not been so
Sidney Powell, man.
In so many of these states that it broke the algorithm.
I remember that one of the things Mark said at some point was, you can't show an actual vote was flipped, which I found at the time to be a remarkable assertion because you don't have to have the gun to see the body lying on the floor bleeding out with 5 bullet holes in it was killed by a gun.
What they were proposing, I thought was nuts. And the theory was also completely nuts, right? I mean, it was a combination of Italians, the Germans. I mean, different things have been floating around as to who was involved. I remember Hugo Chavez and the Venezuelan. She has an affidavit from somebody who says they wrote a software in, it's something with the Philippines, and just all over the radar.
It was total and utter batshit.
Mr. Giuliani,
Batshit insanity.
perspective about him with the president.
I guess, yes.
Tell me what you said.
Basically, not the approach I would take if I was you.
Okay. And how did he react? How did President Trump react when you shared that view with him?
We said, you know, I have confidence in Rudy.
I think I had conversations with probably all of our council who are signed up to assist on Election Day as they disengaged with the campaign. The general consensus was that the law firms were not comfortable making the arguments that Rudy Giuliani was making publicly. I seem to recall that I had a similar conversation with most all of them.
I made it clear I did not agree with the idea of saying the election was stolen and putting out this stuff, which I told the president was bullshit. And
he said, I swear.
Didn't want to be a part of it, and that's one of the reasons that went into me deciding to leave when I did.
Even Sidney Powell, defending herself in a defamation lawsuit brought by Dominion Voting Systems, argued that, quote, no reasonable person would conclude that her statements were truly statements of fact. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the witness for joining us today. The first panel is now dismissed.
Nice little knowing wink there. Jesus. And see, ordinarily, if you had an actual bipartisan committee, the half of the other side would
Without objection,
question the
the
witness.
chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Lofgren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last week, we presented the testimony of former Attorney General Bill Barr, who testified before this committee. Today, we present additional evidence.
God, I wish they'd get confused and it was former Attorney General Bill Burr.
Former President Trump started making claims of election fraud immediately after the election, and that Barr concluded the claims were untrue. Now, due to the length of Attorney General Barr's testimony, we're only going to include relevant portions at the hearing today.
We're only going to pick and choose.
The video.
The department, in fact, when we received specific and credible allegations of fraud, made an effort to look into these to satisfy ourselves that they were without merit. And I was in the posture of trying to figure out, there was an avalanche of all these allegations of fraud that built up over a number of days, and it was like playing whack-a-mole because something would come out one day and then the next day it would be another issue. Also, I was influenced by the fact that all the early claims that I understood were completely bogus and silly and usually based on complete misinformation. And so I didn't consider the quality of claims right out of the box to give me any, feeling that there was really substance here.
For the first time since the election, the Attorney General spoke personally with the President on November 23rd, and this was at the White House. Let's play the video, please.
So on November 23rd, I hadn't spoken to the president since the election, and in fact, as I said, since the middle of October, roughly. And it was a little getting awkward because obviously he had lost the election and I hadn't said anything to him. And so Cipollone said, I think it's time you come over here. And so I came over to meet with the president in the Oval Office, and Meadows and Cipollone were there. And the president, and this is leading up to this conversation with Kushner, the president said there had been major fraud, and that as soon as the facts were out, the results of the election would be reversed. And he went on this for quite a while, as he's prone to do. And then he got to something that I was expecting, which is to say that apparently the Department of Justice doesn't think that it has a role of looking into these fraud claims. And I said, that has to be the campaign that raises that with the state. The department doesn't take side in elections, and the department is not an extension of your legal team. And our role is to investigate fraud, and we'll look at something if it's specific, credible, and could have affected the outcome of the election. And we're doing that, and it's just not. They're just not meritorious. They're not panning out. And as I walked out of the Oval Office, Jared was there with Dan Scavino, who ran the president's social media, and who I thought was a reasonable guy and believe is a reasonable guy. And I said, how long is he going to carry on with this stolen election stuff? Where's this going to go? And by that time, Meadows had caught up with me, and leaving the office, and caught up with me and said that he said, look, I think that he's becoming more realistic and knows that there's a limit to how far he can take this. And then Jared said, yeah, we're working on this. We're working on it.
Even after his attorney general told him his claims of election fraud were false, President Trump continued to promote these claims.
I felt that things continued to deteriorate between the 23rd and the weekend of the 29th. And then on November 29th, he appeared on Maria Bartiromo's show, Sunday Futures, I believe it was. And he said that the department was missing in action.
Well, no, we had glitches where they moved thousands of votes from my account to Biden's account. And these are glitches. So they're not glitches, they're theft, they're fraud.
From my account to Biden's account, it's like they stole money from me.
Dumps. They call them dumps.
I love Trump. You have to understand.
In Michigan and Pennsylvania. And
Man really has a way with words.
how the FBI and Department of Justice, I don't know, maybe they're involved, but how people are allowed to get away from this stuff with this stuff is unbelievable.
Now, spurred by what he saw, Barr told the Associated Press on December 1st that there was no evidence of election fraud. And immediately after Attorney General Barr's statement went public, Mr. Trump berated and he nearly fired Barr. But Barr persisted in telling the president that there was no evidence to support the fraud claims.
This got under my skin, but I also felt it was time for me to say something. So I set up a lunch with the AP reporter, Mike Balsamo, and I told him at lunch, I made this statement, that to date we have not seen fraud on a scale that could have affected a different outcome in the election. I had a later meeting scheduled at the White House at 3 o'clock with Meadows. This was previously scheduled, so I knew this was going to come up, and I went over there and I told my secretary that I thought I would probably be fired and told not to go home. I mean, not to go back to my office. So I said, you might have to pack up for me. And so when I got over there, I met with the chief of staff. He said the president was angry.
Well, thanks, man.
He didn't really get into
It's bad. I know.
And then
I'm tuning out.
Cipollone's office, and we were talking with each other. And word came down that he wanted us both to go to the Oval. And the president was as mad as I've ever seen him, and he was trying to control himself. And the president said, well, this is, killing me. You didn't have to say this. You must have said this because you hate Trump. You hate Trump. And then he raised the big vote dump.
That sounds about
counted in
Sounds about
Detroit.
right. Trump referring to himself as you hate.
That
You hate Trump.
people saw
That's what it
boxes
is. You hate Trump.
counting station at all hours of the morning and so forth. And I explained to him that I at that point I knew the exact number of precincts in Detroit. I think it was 630 something. I said, Mr. President, there are 630 precincts in Detroit, and unlike elsewhere in the state, they centralized the counting process, so they're not counted in each precinct. They're moved to counting stations, and so the normal process would involve boxes coming in at all different hours. So there's nothing. And I said, did anyone point out to you, did all the people complaining about it point out to you, you actually did better in Detroit than you did last time? I mean, there's no indication of fraud in Detroit. And I told him that the stuff that his people were shoveling out to the public was bullshit. I mean, that the claims of fraud were bullshit. And, he was indignant about that. And I reiterated that they'd wasted a whole month on these claims on the Dominion voting machines, and they were idiotic claims. And I specifically raised the Dominion voting machines, which I found to be among the most disturbing allegations. Disturbing in the sense that I saw absolutely zero basis for the allegations, but they were made in such a sensational way that they obviously were influencing a lot of people, members of the public, that there was this systemic corruption in the system and that their votes didn't
Legit.
count, and that these
I don't think I'm going to be doing the rest of these. These are so incredibly dry.
Which is complete nonsense, and it was being laid out there. And I told them that it was crazy stuff, and they were wasting their time on that, and it was doing a grave disservice to the country.
Okay, so the very next day, the president released a video rehashing some of the very same claims that his chief law enforcement officer had told him were, quote, nonsense.
Here's an example. This is Michigan. At 6:31 in the morning, a vote dump of 149,772 votes came in unexpectedly. We were winning by a lot.
Suspiciously.
That batch
Yes.
was received in horror.
I'm going to come.
His name is Dominion. With the turn of a dial or the change of a chip, you can press a button for Trump and the vote goes to Biden. What kind of a system is this?
I don't understand how you guys have electronic anything voting.
Nothing to these claims.
Just fucking check a box and read the piece of paper. Like, Jesus
When I walked
Christ.
in, sat down, he went off on
Paper ballots work fine.
a monologue saying that there was now definitive
Count the shit by hand.
involving fraud through the Dominion.
Not like you have to worry about preferences.
The report had been prepared by a very reputable cybersecurity firm, which he identified as Allied Security Operations Group, and he held up the report, and then he asked that a copy of it be made.
Just go in to vote, and here's your presidential ballot.
This is
Here's
absolutely
your
proof.
state ballot. Here's your this, like a couple of ballots. Easy. Put it into this box. Put that one in this box. Okay.
Then
Off you go.
Gave me a copy of the report, and as he talked more and more about it, I sat there flipping through the report and looking through it. And to be frank, it looked very amateurish to me. Didn't have the credentials of the people involved, but I didn't see any real qualifications. And the statements were made very conclusory, like, these machines were designed to, engage in fraud or something to that effect, but I didn't see any supporting information for it. And I was somewhat demoralized because I thought, boy, if he really believes this stuff, he has, lost contact with he's become detached from reality if he really believes this stuff. On the other hand, when I went into this and would, tell him how crazy some of these allegations were, there was never there was never an indication of interest in what the actual facts were. In my opinion then, and my opinion now, is that the election was not stolen by fraud. And I haven't seen anything since the election that changes my mind on that, including the 2000 Mules movie. Familiar with the 2000?
Well, maybe you can assess that 2,000 mules, and people are talking about that.
Well, I mean, just in a nutshell, I just think the GBI was unimpressed with it, and I was similarly unimpressed with it because I think I was holding my fire on that to see what the photographic evidence was, because I thought, well, hell, if they have a lot of photographs of the same person dumping a lot of ballots in different boxes, that's hard to explain. So I wanted to see what the photographic evidence was, but the cell phone data is singularly unimpressive. I mean, it basically, if you take 2 million cell phones and figure out where they are physically in a big city like Atlanta or wherever, just by definition, you're going to find many hundreds of them have passed by and spent time in the vicinity of these boxes. And the premise that, if you go by a box, 5 boxes or whatever it was, that's a mule is just indefensible. It by definition, you're going to have hundreds of this. I mean, I saw one contractor said, we figured out that our truck alone would account for 6 cell phone signals. This was some kind of contractor, and our route would take us by these things on a regular basis. So but then when the movie came out, I think the photographic evidence in it was completely I mean, there was a little bit of it, but it was lacking. It didn't establish widespread illegal harvesting. The other thing is people don't understand is that it's not clear that even if you can show harvesting, that changes the results of the election. The courts are not going to throw out votes and then figure out what votes were harvested and throw them out. It's still the burden on the challenging party to show that illegal votes were cast. Votes were the result of
this is a good point.
Bribes, or there was really, the person was non compos mentis. But absent that evidence, I just didn't see courts throwing out votes anyway. I felt that.
And that is a lot of the reason why he said, look, it's hopeless.
To talk sense to the president. And while you sometimes had to engage in, a big wrestling match with him, that it was possible to keep things on track. But I felt that after the election, he didn't seem to be listening, and I didn't think it was, that I was inclined not to stay around if he wasn't listening to advice from me or his other cabinet secretaries.
So on December 14th, Barr quit. Now, the Attorney General wasn't the only person who told the president that his claims were false. Other officials and close advisors...
Calling this a hearing is kind of a misnomer.
Other than...
Important that we all remember that this is not a judicial hearing.
Let me just say, there were...
It's a political hearing.
Where the president would say, people are telling me this, or I've heard this, or I saw on television, this impropriety in Atlanta or Pennsylvania or something.
Why does this sound like it's on a wiretap?
Our people have already looked at that, and we know that you're getting bad information, that's not correct. It's been demonstrated to be incorrect.
I'm interested in this stuff, and I feel like they're losing me. Like I'm...
A month and a half or so after the election day.
I'm not going to cover the other ones. No way. Not if it's like this. No way.
Fraud were discussed, and Eric and Pat didn't, told the group, the president included, that none of those allegations had been substantiated to the point where they could be the basis for any litigation challenge to the election.
President Trump's own vice president and his top advisors also knew that there wasn't evidence to support the claims that the president was making.
Anyone else other than Mr. Meadows who asked you about the status, outside of your legal group, you know, Mr. Morgan and the others you mentioned, anyone else who asked you the status of what you were finding in your assessment of it?
Yes, sir.
Who's that?
Peter Navarro.
When did you talk to Mr. Navarro?
Mid-November.
Around the same time as Mr. Meadows?
Yes, sir.
And tell me about that conversation.
I recall him asking me questions about Dominion and maybe some other categories of allegations of voter fraud. And I remember telling him that I didn't believe the Dominion allegations because I thought the hand recount in Georgia would resolve any issues with the technology problem and with Dominion or Dominion flipping votes. And I mentioned at that time that the CISA, Chris Krebs, had recently released a report saying that the election was secure. And I believe Mr. Navarro accused me of being an agent of the deep state working with Chris Krebs against the president. And I never took another phone call from Mr. Navarro.
Anyone else besides Mr. Meadows, Mr. Navarro, Mr. Hirschman that you had discussions with inquiring about what you were finding in your review of the allegations that were pouring in?
I believe I had about a 15-second conversation with the vice president about it as well.
When was that?
During one of the visits to the White House. I don't know which one. I think it was the first one in November. I had met him briefly at the campaign, and he remembered me and saw me. And he asked what I was doing on the campaign, and I told him that, you know, we were looking into some of the issues related to voter fraud. And he asked me, I don't remember his exact words, but he asked me if we were finding anything. And I said that I didn't believe we were finding it, or I was not personally finding anything sufficient to alter the results of the election. And he thanked me. That was our interaction.
At a later hearing, you'll hear live testimony from the former acting Deputy Attorney General of the Department of Justice, Rich Donoghue. But now I'd like to play a portion of his testimony.
I tried to, again, put this in perspective and to try to put it in very clear terms to the president. And I said something to the effect of, sir, we've done dozens of investigations, hundreds of interviews. The major allegations are not supported by the evidence developed. We've looked at Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Nevada. We're doing our job. Much of the info you're getting is false. And then I went into, for instance, this thing from Michigan, this report about 68% error rate. Reality is it was only 0.0063% error rate, less than 1 in 15,000. So the president accepted that. He said, okay, fine, but what about the others? And again, this gets back to the point that there were so many of these allegations that when you gave him a very direct answer on one of them, he wouldn't fight us on it, but he would move to another allegation. So then I talked about a little bit about the Pennsylvania truck driver. This is another allegation that had come up. And this claim was by a truck driver who believed, perhaps honestly, that he had transported an entire tractor-trailer truck full of ballots from New York to Pennsylvania. And this was, again, out there in the public and discussed. And I essentially said, look, we looked at that allegation. We looked at both ends, both the people who load the truck and the people who unload the truck. and that allegation was not supported by the evidence. Again, he said, okay, and then he said, no, I didn't mention that one. What about the others? And I said, okay, well, with regard to Georgia, we looked at the tape, we interviewed the witnesses. There is no suitcase. The president kept fixating on this suitcase that supposedly had fraudulent ballots, and that the suitcase was rolled out from under the table. And I said, no, sir, there is no suitcase. You can watch that video over and over. There is no suitcase. There is a wheeled bin where they carry the ballots, and that's just how they move ballots around that facility. There's nothing suspicious about that at all. I told them that there was no multiple scanning of the ballots. One part of that allegation was that they were taking one ballot and scanning it through 3 or 4 or 5 times to rack up votes, presumably for Vice President Biden. I told them that the video did not support that. Then he went off on double voting. At the top of the next page, he said, dead people are voting. Indians are getting paid to vote. He meant people on Native American reservations. He said there's lots of fraud going on here. Told him flat out that much of the information he's getting is false and or just not supported by the evidence. We look at the allegations, but they don't pan out.
Mr. Barr and his advisors were not the only ones who determined that the president's allegations regarding Dominion voting machines were false. So, Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to include in the record of this hearing reports issued by the Department of Homeland Security's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, otherwise known as CISA, that addressed and rejected the claims of manipulation of voting machines in the 2020 election.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also ask unanimous consent to include in the record a report prepared by the Michigan Senate Oversight Committee that disproved claims of election fraud in Michigan, as well as a statement by 59 of the country's leading election security scientists, noting the absence of any credible evidence that the 2020 election had been altered through technical compromise, and 5 other reports from organizations and individuals confirming.
Can we get one of those for 2016 as well?
2020 election, or describing the spread of the former president's lies.
Because I'm pretty sure if you ask them about 2016, they'd tell you, oh no, that was definitely stolen.
Chairman, and I yield back.
Pursuant to the order of the committee for today, the chair declares the committee in recess for a period of approximately 10 minutes.
Oh. Why? Good God, this woman looks like a melted ice cream. It's a 10-minute recess. You're all leaving the fucking room. Where are you going to go in 10 minutes and get back? Oh, I think that's it for me. I can't do this. This is propaganda, but it's not even entertaining propaganda. I apologize. I'm unable to continue. My resolve has been broken.
My disappointment is immeasurable, and my day is ruined.
I would literally rather watch anything else. I'd rather, actually, you know what? Let's. Walters. 5. Where was the Young Turks? Let's drop in on these drop kicks. Oh God, look, everybody's through. See, I should have put Q Sharma in mine.
Democrats. Those are not progressives. Those are Republicans on his team telling him, please, sir, please. Okay, and Barr summarized it well at one point, saying, look, after the election, he just became detached from reality. And that's exactly right. And so the Barr testimony was obliterating. Look, I know that Trump voters don't know the context of Washington. They barely know the context of life, right? So the people that are still hanging on, which is a great majority of Republican voters,
Holy
saying,
shit.
no,
I mean, because even that's not entertaining. Jesus. No, that's it. I'm out. My apologies. I love yous all. Good night. I won't be doing this again. This was just horrible. My apologies. Adios.